What's up, guys? Happy Wednesday. Welcome to episode 27 of The Attachment Confessions. It's your girl, Chelsea, here, and as always, I'm so pumped you're tuning in. We've got such a good one for you today. We're kicking off our summer guest series with a freaking banger, no pun intended, so you guys are definitely in for a treat. And just in case you're an Attachment Confessions first timer, let me fill you in really quickly on what the pod is all about. From the moment I discovered attachment science, everything about every relationship I had ever been in finally made sense. And now I'm figuring out what it takes to earn my attachment security and have the best possible relationships from now on. Here on the Attachment Confessions, we'll be diving into all things attachment science while you guys tag along on my attachment healing adventure. My hope is that by bringing attachment science to those of you who have never heard of it before, and by sharing my own story, you'll also be inspired to set out on your own attachment healing journey. One of the many wildly fascinating things about attachment science is that the patterns, behaviors, and blueprints wired into our nervous systems from our parents in childhood that then go on to predict how we show up in our romantic relationships are learned. Therefore, if you're one of the lucky ones, like me, that formed an insecure attachment style as a kid, we have the power to unlearn it and earn our attachment security. Healing from your past and learning how to love and be loved in a healthy way is 100% possible. So, if having the best relationships of your life is your goal, just like it is mine, you're in the right place. A couple quick reminders. My free attachment conversation guide for couples is now available. So, if you're looking for a roadmap on how to talk about all the things when it comes to your relationships, I've got you covered, fam. Reach out to me on my Instagram at The Attachment Confessions or email Chelsea at theattachmentconfessions.com and I'll get the guide in your hands. Also, if you're looking to stop making excuses and finally learn the brain changing tools to heal your attachment, world renowned attachment expert and relationship coach, Dr. Sarah Hensley, is offering listeners of the Attachment Confessions 10% off any of her attachment healing programs. Use code Chelsea10 at thelovedoc.com and go earn your attachment security. Check out the link in the show notes. Alrighty, guys, like I mentioned at the end of our last episode, today's topic is sure to ruffle some feathers. And if you've been tagging along on this podcast journey, you know I'm all here for shining a light on the things that need to get called out, but so often don't. So, what are we putting on blast today? Two words: hookup culture. Casual hookups with whoever, whenever seem to be the norm in this day and age. And depending on the content you consume, that sort of lifestyle that we used to try our best to keep on the DL is now openly encouraged and celebrated. Hookup culture promises freedom and fun, but if you want to know what science actually says, especially for those of us with insecure attachment styles, well, you're in for a rude awakening. Don't get me wrong, I am in no way preaching this from a squeaky clean pulpit. I've also been there, done that, got the Walk of Shame t shirt myself. Did I leave those encounters feeling what culture tries to convince us into believing we'd feel? Liberated, empowered, and ready to hit the streets again the next night? No, not even close. I think a lot of us tell ourselves that keeping things casual is the safe option, that it protects us from getting hurt or makes us feel in control. But contrary to what we're being sold, hookup culture actually does quite the opposite. It reinforces our wounds, deepens our destructive patterns, and makes earning our attachment security even harder. But don't just take my word for it. I recently sat down with certified relationship and attachment trauma expert Bev Mitelman to unpack the inconvenient truth behind why hookup culture and attachment healing are fundamentally at odds. I have a feeling this one's going to hit close to home for a lot of us, but please hear me when I say I didn't want to have this convo with Bev to shame anybody. I wanted to have it so that we can finally break free from the lies hookup culture's been trying to sell us and take back control of the most precious, sacred part of ourselves so that earning our attachment security can be more within reach. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into my discussion with Bev. Welcome to the Attachment Confessions, Bev. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Hookup culture is something that I feel like we're essentially being brainwashed into believing that it's this empowering thing and that it's totally harmless. But as we're obviously going to dive into today, thanks to your expertise, the science shows us otherwise. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I think it's a much needed conversation too. So thank you for bringing it to the forefront because I think we need to talk about this.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of noise out there that claims otherwise, so it's definitely time to have this conversation. So to get started, I'd love for you to share with our listeners just a little bit about your background and how you got into your work with attachment.
So I am the founder of Securely Loved. I've been working in the field of attachment for years now. And I stumbled over attachment theory years ago in my own personal journey. I had tried so many different modalities of therapy and counseling and somatic experiences. And when I found attachment theory, it was sort of the piece that I had been missing. It explained my thought pattern, my emotional patterns, my behavior, my coping mechanisms. And I was like, you have to remember this was years ago. It's like, we're not talking about this. And now, of course, we're talking so much more about it, which is great. But at the time, I was like, this is where I should be spending time. Like, it was so impactful for me. Other people will find this incredibly useful as well. And I'm so glad I did. And I'm so glad that our society is now talking about it and understanding the importance of emotional bonds and attachment and how it shows up in relationships. And so I know when I'm speaking to you and your audience, you already have a good base for what, attachment styles are. So yeah, happy to have this conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So, before we dive into the impact that hookup culture has had on attachment specifically, I'd love to have you touch on what exactly hookup culture is. Can you define it for us?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just put it out there that I think you and I are of different generations. And the only reason that I say that is because language tends to be very specific to geography, to generations, to specific groups of people.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just celebrated, I just turned 50. And I don't think you're anywhere near that.
I might be a little closer than you think. I'm 12 years off.
Okay, so you're still in your 30s, which would
Mm.
mean that like for a 30-year-old, a 50-year-old, and an 18-year-old to talk about, hookup culture, it might be something very different. But
Yeah.
what I understand hookup culture to be is really just this, I think, quasi silly version that was sold to women around feminine empowerment of you can have sex with whoever you want and there's no consequence to that, right? Almost
Mhm.
like part of the feminist movement, right? So we started to see free love and sex in the 60s. Now the concept of autonomy over your body and choice, if you want to have sex, you want to experience it, it's your choice, it's not forced, it's always consensual. I fully agree with that. But I think the part around, you can have sex and there'll be no emotional consequence, I think that was muddied a little bit. We all know as women that if you have sex, there's potentially always physical consequences, right? Potentially there's the prospect of pregnancy, the prospect of, some sort of STI, for example. But do we spend time thinking about the emotional consequence? And this is oftentimes more important for women than it is men, because on average, and there's always outliers, but on average, women do tend to bond more deeply with men through sex. So in this case, we're talking about, heterosexual couples. We have a man, we have a woman. The woman is more likely to develop feelings, or I think the younger generation will say catch feelings through sexual intercourse than a man would. And this all has to do with attachment. But the
Right.
science actually shows us that the emotional attachment that a man will feel through sex is generally more so if he already has an emotional connection to a woman. So if
Okay.
they've been dating for a while and he's starting to catch feelings and really feel something for her, if he has sex with her, he's likely to deepen those feelings that are already brewing, which is
Okay.
not the same thing as casual hookup culture. I sleep with this guy on a Tuesday and I sleep with that person on a Wednesday. That's not exactly the same thing. So I
Right.
think a lot of women are waking up to the idea that autonomy and choice, absolutely, but some women, depending on your attachment styles, particularly if you're anxiously preoccupied, their nervous system is not wired particularly well for hookup culture,
Right.
meaning they're not going to feel good about themselves the next day when they
Mhm.
don't get a text back, they don't get a phone call, or they're thinking that was the best night of my life, and they never hear from the guy again. There are some people who would do much better with that scenario than others.
Okay, yeah. I can imagine how that could go south, especially for someone with more of an anxious attachment. So I want to dive into the effects of participating in hookup culture for each attachment style. First off, though, I'm assuming that someone with a secure attachment isn't as likely to engage in random hookup scenarios. Is that a correct assumption to make?
Yeah, it's really fair, which means that typically someone who has a secure attachment is going to look for a connection, right? So they're much more likely to gravitate towards longer term, meaningful connections. Now, that doesn't mean that two people can meet and sometimes, there's alcohol involved, or sometimes it's like, and they could engage in a one night stand. So it's not to say that someone that has a secure attachment won't engage in a one night stand. People do all sorts of things, but the tendency is for a secure person to actually value a true, authentic relationship and connection. And that's what they're usually geared towards. So they might have a one night stand, but their normal pattern would be they feel most comfortable in a relationship that offers true companionship. They're not searching for this.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's start with our anxious, preoccupied friends. So, how does hookup culture feed into and really worsen their core wound of the fear of abandonment?
It's such a great question. If it's okay with you, I kind of want
Mhm.
to start with the dismissive avoidant because then it
Okay,
feeds into the anxious preoccupied,
sure, let's
right?
do it.
Like we were talking about, the secure person is not looking for the hookup. They're not actively trying to be a member of the, hookup club.
Okay,
The dismissive avoidant is leading the club. So the dismissive avoidant generally is most comfortable in a relationship whereby there is limited emotional commitment and engagement, or limited, expectations of emotionality. So
right.
something like a one night stand, or sort of like a regular sex partner that you hook up with, once every fourth Thursday. There's no sleepovers, there's no pillow talk, there's none of that. Nothing that could actually create a physical bond. These are the types of situationships that really appeal to the dismissive avoidant. And that's because, the dismissive avoidant generally will enjoy sex for the physicality of it. It's a release. It's a physical thing. In fact, they're very apt, if you pay attention to, favorite positions of a dismissive avoidant, they're very apt to prefer positions whereby you are not face to face. Because the intensity and emotionality of staring into someone's eyes while you're making love, will say, it requires a lot of emotionality.
Yeah, lots of intimacy with that.
Intimacy, vulnerability, like it requires a lot. And so they will often avoid that. The wonderful world of sex has a million different positions, right? And they will tend to gravitate ones where they're not really face to face with you.
No gazing into each other's eyes.
It's
Do not
not,
look into my soul.
yeah, it's not really what they're after. In fact, again, if
Right.
you're paying attention, it's really interesting. If you do find yourself face to face while you're having sex with someone who's truly dismissive avoidant, pay attention. They will close their eyes. They're not looking to emotionally bond. So they're actually employing these strategies that they're not even aware of to minimize the possibility of emotionally bonding.
Wow. Okay. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
It's
Yeah.
very interesting. And so, they will engage. They have very strong boundaries, which means like you might get into a situation where it'll be like, okay, I'll come over Thursday at 8, but I have to leave by 10. I'm not staying the night. There's no pillow talk. Don't call me the next day. They'll be very, very specific. And if you go, you know what, that's no good for me, like they'll go, okay. Like usually they might even have a roster of a bunch of people, so it's just like okay, and they don't really care. I talk about this in a very sort of straightforward way, not to say that dismissive avoidants are mean. They're not mean people. They're actually usually
Right.
quite upfront. Whether the person hears what they're saying or not is another story, right? Many women think, oh, wait till he's in bed with me and I'll change his mind. He'll want a relationship with me or whatever it is. They're usually very upfront. They tell you, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. And so, I think as people have to get a little better at listening to
Right.
what people are saying.
Not
Yeah.
going into things thinking, oh, I can be the one to change them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very interesting because a lot of people, from my own experience and also from a lot of people that I've worked with over the years, will describe sex with a dismissive avoidant as being probably some of their best experiences. And it's because there can be an element of performance with a dismissive avoidance. It can be performative, which means they're not really connected to their emotions, right?
Mhm.
It's almost like a role that they're playing. And again, they're not doing this to harm you. They don't really know how to connect to their emotions. They were never taught. These
Mhm.
are children who grew up in homes where they were neglected.
Mhm.
And so they don't know how to connect to their own emotions, let alone yours,
Right.
especially in a highly intimate moment like during sex. So it
Mhm.
can become really performative, which in the moment can feel really passionate and really exciting and, life changing. But as soon as it's over, it's over. It's like you're laying there thinking, oh my God, what was that? And the dismissive avoidant is going, that was good. Now I need a cheeseburger.
Right. Thank you. Next. But what do you think? I mean, is there anything going on underneath the surface for a DA that actually is damaging when they're constantly partaking in this hookup culture?
Yeah, so I do believe that as humans, we are intended to connect with other people. I think that, even Esther Perel talks about how the quality of your life is really dependent on the quality of your relationships. And the quality of your relationships is really, as I put it, dependent on your attachment style. And so if you're unable to truly form an authentic and deep bond with someone and you're just at that surface level, I think you're missing out a lot. That's
Hmm.
what I think. I don't believe that I've ever met a dismissive avoidance. As you know that attachment styles are not gendered, so it could be men or women. So I don't
Hmm.
think I've ever met a dismissive avoidant in their 40s or 50s that is happy that they have a different partner every week. Like that gets old. So when you're 20 years old and you're hooking up and you're just having fun and it's part of your exploration, it's sort of acceptable because it's like, sex is new to you and you're figuring things out. um, when you're unable to then morph one of those connections into something with depth and
Mhm.
meaning and commitment, it's an issue. It's an issue for you and your own emotionality, right? Like I think we are intended to pair bond.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then let's backtrack to our anxious preoccupieds, if you don't mind. Unless is there,
No,
do you think there's more to go into
no,
with the name?
I think we'll flip-flop a little bit because what happens is that usually the dismissive avoidance end up partnering with, especially on the, on the hookup culture scene, with anxious preoccupieds. And these are their easiest targets,
Hmm.
right? And I say targets for a reason. So someone is anxious preoccupied, they grew up in a home where love was unpredictable or inconsistent,
Yeah.
right? They learned that they had to earn love, they had to minimize their own needs, they had to put focus on other people. They learned that to accept breadcrumbs at a very young age. Like, my
Mhm.
father's only able to be nice to me half the time. Well, I guess it's better than nothing, right?
Mm,
They were conditioned to that. And
yeah.
so when they get into adult relationships, sexual relationships, their normal, what is familiar to them, is oftentimes a lot of the behaviors that we see in avoidance. And then you throw on this social conditioning of hookup culture and, women own their body and their choice and they're this, and women are empowered to have sex with whoever they want. And we mistaken that for what's good for us.
Hmm.
And so a woman who is anxiously preoccupied and who has sex with someone who is dismissive avoidant will absolutely be hurt by that experience
Mm,
because they're not going to get what it is they're looking for. Someone who is who's anxiously preoccupied, what they're
hmm.
looking for is emotional bonding and emotional closeness. They're able to calm their nervous system through comfort of others. They're not able to self-soothe very well. They haven't learned those skills. And so
Yeah.
their focus is always on pleasing someone else. And so if a man says to them, okay, let's have sex tonight, they're the most likely people to say, okay, why not? They're the most likely people to engage in risky behavior because they
Mhm.
don't know how to say no or stand up for themselves, or they don't want to displease the other person for fear that they will leave, right? The
Right.
core wound is always I fear I will be abandoned. So a
Mm.
perfect example might be for illustration purposes, a young couple and they're having a good time and they're about to have sex, but there's no condom available, right? And maybe the man will say something like, "Oh, it's okay. I got this. Everything will be fine." It's very likely that the anxious, preoccupied woman will say, um, okay, it's fine, and just be careful, right? Because they don't want to lose the attention of the man in that moment. They
Yeah.
will engage in that risky behavior. They'll have trouble setting a boundary for themselves.
Yeah.
Now, a secure woman in the same scenario will turn around and say, that's too bad. Looks like we're not having sex tonight. The secure person, that's the difference just in this little scenario, right? The
Sure.
secure person is, more worried about losing themselves,
Right.
maintaining their boundaries, their integrity over pleasing someone else,
Yeah.
right? So
Hmm.
we see lots and lots of examples of this where women who are anxious, preoccupied enter into sexual relationships that they have they have agreed to, right? So consent was given, but almost in a coerced way.
Hmm.
And it's a gray zone because they're too afraid to speak their mind. So they don't say, I don't really want to do this. So they go along with it
Hmm.
and their partner thinks, okay, there's consent. And so
Hmm.
it's a bit of a gray area, right? So we see lots of examples for like, couples entering into like threesomes. And, years later, the woman said, well, he always wanted me to do this. And I've worked with couples, and the man would say to me, you never once told me you didn't want to do it. And this is truly an anxious, preoccupied. They are unsure of their needs. They're
Hmm.
very focused on pleasing their partner, and they're afraid of losing their partner. They're afraid of being alone. They're afraid of being abandoned, and all of these things, so that they generally become so congenial in all aspects of life, including the bedroom, in
Wow.
order to keep their partner happy. So
Yeah.
now you've got this sort of like the traits of the anxious, preoccupied person, and then you've got this socialization of hookup culture is great, and they're clashing. They're clashing because, first of all, hookup culture is generally like geared towards the younger folks, right? Like
Hmm.
teenagers, early 20s, who are still finding themselves. They're still young. They haven't developed full maturity yet, definitely not full, sexual maturity. Um,
Hmm.
they already have an insecure attachment style, which means that they're not entirely emotionally regulated. They are going to likely, especially as an anxious preoccupied, they're going to overfeel their feelings. They have a grand propensity to possibly mistaken sex for love, right?
Hmm.
To fall in love with someone that they had sex with because of all the chemicals in our brain, the dopamine, the oxytocin. By the
Yeah.
way, Chelsea, if the sex is good, that makes everything so much worse. Because if the sex is bad, then people don't get attached in the same way. But when the sex is good and it's orgasmic, then you have dopamine and oxytocin. And oxytocin is that bonding chemical. And so you've got this young cohort of people who think it's okay to sort of sleep around because it's empowering, but they don't realize the damage that they're doing to their emotions, in that
Yeah.
they're allowing themselves to get emotionally attached to someone. They don't know them. They don't know the first thing about this person. Is this person kind? But do they have any level of integrity?
Yeah.
Right? What are their values in this world? But they've had a couple of good nights with them, and they're in love, and their mind creates all these stories. It's very dangerous. This is, to me, this is putting the cart before the horse. So the advice that
Yeah.
I always say is get to know someone first. There's no magical number. I would never ascribe to someone you need 6 dates before you do this. You know yourself how quickly you get attached to someone.
Some
But
people don't. Some people don't, they're that, have those blind spots to themselves because they maybe aren't like us and obsessed with attachment science and don't know the first thing about it. Yeah, and they're just out there being told like, "Hey, this is empowering, this is harmless," but it's quite the opposite, but they don't realize it until it's too late.
they'll learn the hard way. But anytime that you give anything of yourself, there's always risk.
Mm.
There's always risk, right? And so,
Mhm.
I always say, be careful who gets access to you.
Yeah.
Whether that be emotionally, physically, sexually, there's potential risks in all scenarios, like even
Mhm.
friendships, right? Who you
Mhm.
tell and what you tell them. And so be careful who you give access to. And the
Uh,
best way is to just get to know someone over time.
mhm.
If you end up having a couple of one night stands, and people go through periods in their life, when they're younger or after a divorce, you tend to have more casual sex, like our research will show. But understand where your own limits are so that you don't inadvertently fall in love with someone and get emotionally bonded, emotionally, attached before you know who they are, before you've done your due diligence. don't you want to know if this person is kind and has integrity and a
Mhm.
clear vision and purpose in life before you fall in love with them?
Well, you hear so often people say, oh, I can do XYZ, and there's no sort of emotions attached to it. And I mean, the science shows that, especially with oxytocin, the bonding hormone, that's just not true. It's just not true. It's a lie that we're
So,
telling ourselves and that we're being sold.
yeah, so some people will get attached much faster than others. An anxious, preoccupied person will get attached much faster than an avoidant, but eventually an avoidant will get attached too. So if
Mm,
you have sex with the same person 3, 4, 5 times and it's consistently good sex, you will get attached. Whereas, an anxious, preoccupied might get hooked after one night because they
mhm,
tend to move real fast with connections. With all types of connections, whether it be like romantic relationships, sexual connections, they'll go from kissing to having sex like in one night. It's all very fast. They'll
mm,
meet someone new and the next thing they're their best friends. They just sort of accelerate all types of relationships really, really quickly.
yeah.
That's sort of the speed at which they operate at. Whereas the avoidant is, well, the opposite of that, really. They take things really,
Mhm.
really slow. Um, but yeah, I think that eventually, if you continue to have even an avoidance, will will develop an emotional attachment to someone.
Yeah. So let's talk about the fearful avoidant, because we've talked about anxious preoccupieds, we've talked about dismissive avoidance. Obviously, the fearful avoidant is the best of both worlds, if we want to call it that. Very complex group that I am a part of. And I think, did you share with
I
me when
am too.
we talked that you're a healed fearful avoidant? So, with that hot, cold, push pull dynamic and their core fear of betrayal, tell me a little bit how that plays into the hookup culture piece with how it affects them.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So we know that those who are fearful avoidance, they generally come out of homes where there was a high degree of chaos and or abuse, right?
Mm,
So they're a bit of a different group. And it's not a homogenous group, meaning that especially if the abuse was sexual in nature, it
mm,
could be a very different outcome. So we see two specific sort of impacts within the fearful avoiding group. One side of the coin is we find that people don't engage in hookup culture at all, right?
okay.
So they don't engage with sex at all. They have such a hard time establishing any level of trust to get to that point to allow someone to touch their body and to open up, and it just doesn't feel good for them, right? We're talking
Mhm.
about people who are unhealed, right? The other cohort, the other side of the coin, and we do see this often too, is we see fearful avoidance who do become hypersexual. And what that means is they end up using sex as a way to have some level of connection without too much intimacy. So more on sort of the way the avoidance would do it, right?
Okay.
So it's like that push and pull. Okay, so I'll have sex with you, and then I probably won't speak with you for 3 weeks, but then I will call you back, and then maybe we'll have sex again, whereas an avoidant might never call you back again, right? So there's the push pull, but
Mhm.
oftentimes too, when a fearful avoidant is unhealed, we do see multiple partners, polyamorous types of relationships, non-committal, don't get too close. We see a lot of those types of scenarios too.
Okay. Interesting. So I'd love to talk about the aspect of self-worth in all of this. Because that's a huge core wound that is honestly, I think, common among all three insecure attachments, just in their own unique way. How does hookup culture impact self-worth over time?
I think it depends on who you are, right? So, and it depends on your starting point. So if you already, so because our sense of self-worth really is tied to our attachment style as
Mhm.
well. So someone who has an anxious, preoccupied attachment style, we know that they have very little trust in themselves, but they
Mhm.
afford trust to everyone else.
Mhm.
Whereas someone who is avoidantly attached, they've got a high degree of trust in themselves and very little trust for others. Right?
Mhm.
So depending on where you're starting from, why you're engaging in the activity to begin with. So if you're engaging it as an anxious, preoccupied in a sexual activity because you think it's going to get you emotional attention or connection with someone, and that doesn't transpire in the way that you wanted, basically you're going to believe that you weren't worthy of the attention or love that you were trying to get. Now, anxious preoccupieds often use sex as a tool. It's a means for connection. We see
Mm.
this a lot, right? Whereas someone who's avoidantly attached and has a high degree of, self-esteem and self-worth, but not so much for other people, and they're just engaging in hookup culture because, hey, it feels good, and once or twice a week, that's what I want to do. It's just a physical release. It's not going to have much of an impact on them. The interesting thing is that there is usually a moment whereby they meet someone that impacts them differently than others. And this is usually a moment where they start to think about, okay, maybe I do want something a little bit more than one night stands.
That is super interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
but so the avoidantly attached person is least likely to take a hit in their self-worth because their self-worth is already high. And then,
Hmm.
the fearful avoidant or the disorganized who doesn't really trust their own sense of self, or they don't trust other people, um, they're likely to perpetuate the story of, I knew I shouldn't have done it. I knew he wasn't going to call me back. I knew I wasn't good enough for him. Like any of these sort of stories that would perpetuate low self-esteem. The two attachment styles that are likely to feel a degree of shame after the hooking up are the anxious preoccupied and the fearful avoidant.
I mean, that makes total sense.
Yeah, I wish women understood that. See, I mean, again, as being a little bit older, I was around more for the sort of earlier generations of the women's movement, right? And
Mm.
it was always about choice. It was always about giving women choice and autonomy. And we talk about how free love and free sex sort of came about in the 60s when the pill was introduced, because it took away now, the possibility of getting pregnant, which was extremely liberating for women at the time, right? But
Mm.
we never considered the emotional impact. I don't believe that women are intended to have sex, without partnership. It doesn't mean that I haven't, experienced it myself too, and for short periods of time in my life. But in
Mhm.
general, I think we are better served in partnerships.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the more that you've studied this from a clinical standpoint, you've not only been able to connect your own experiences of, hey, whenever I was participating in, more casual type of relationships, paired with the science that you know from studying this, you're like, okay, there's the correlation there of like, yeah, maybe I have also like felt icky, and science says that that is a very likely result of that type of a lifestyle.
Yeah, and
So,
people can assess this for themselves too, right? So we have all sorts of
mhm.
coping behaviors. Some are good and some are not so good. But when we're not feeling so good about ourselves, or we're stressed, or we feel emotionally dysregulated, we all have a set of coping mechanisms, right? To try to balance ourselves and make us feel better. Some people reach for a bag of Cheetos or ice cream. Other people use drugs, other people, use alcohol, and some people use sex, right? Sex is addictive in that, like
Mm.
many other things, gambling, right? So it's a behavior that's intended to distract, and it's intended to, provide short-term pleasure to help you sort of numb out negative emotions that you may be feeling.
Mm-hmm.
When sex is being used in that way, you know that you're missing the point.
Mm,
So, sex can mean many different things to many different people. But generally, most people, especially if you're securely attached, will see sex as a combination of things. The physical closeness, the emotional closeness, the sexual pleasure, the emotional bonding. It's sort of like it's many different things. So
mm-hmm.
when it's just being used as a mechanism to numb out, you're missing the boat on what it's really supposed to be doing, right? It's
Right.
sort of we could talk about chocolate cake is a good example too. Like, when you go to a restaurant and you sit and you have a beautiful dinner and then you dessert comes and you savor 2 or 3 spoonfuls of that decadent chocolate cake, it's incredible. Like you feel it almost in like every cell of your body. It's just delicious, right? It's an
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's supposed to be. It's decadent. It's pleasure. It's like it's what we live for, those moments where you feel you're most alive, right? Sex is in the
Mm-hmm.
same category. But think
Mm.
about think about, when you're feeling really low and you take out a whole tub of ice cream from your freezer and you eat the whole damn thing at once. Do you
Yeah.
feel good afterwards?
No, you hate yourself afterwards.
You hate yourself. You feel nauseous. You probably have a headache. Your body's reacting to too much sugar. Like there's nothing decadent or pleasurable about it. It's in
Right.
excess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And because you're utilizing a substance to numb out,
To
right? That's
fill a deeper void, right?
right.
Just like drugs or alcohol. It's like using those things in excess or in order to avoid reality or numb out. That's just band-aiding a deeper symptom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I've heard people say to me, uh, I watched all of this, all of Bridgerton on the weekend, all 4 seasons. And I was like, all of it? Like that's a lot. And
Dang.
they'll be like, I had nothing else to do. And I'm like, okay. And then someone will say, oh, I had sex with so and so on Thursday. And I'm like, really? Why? Well, I had nothing else to do. We have, in some ways, made sex sort of just this behavior of, just something to do on a Thursday night, to
Right.
numb out, avoid your feelings, avoid boredom, whatever it is. I
Yeah.
happen to think that sex is much more important in our lives, right, for human connection.
Yeah. Well, it's marketed to be, oh, it's no big deal. You can do whatever you want and there's no consequences to it as long as you're safe, whatever that means. But it's like, well, that's not being emotionally safe.
No, it's
Yeah.
not. Well, I'm
Yeah.
so glad we had this conversation. I think it's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. I am too. I think it's super important. So thank you so much for all of your insight and expertise, Bev. Where can my listeners find you if they want to check out your stuff?
Thank you so much. My website is securelyloved.com. I'm also on Instagram at securely_loved. I also have my own YouTube channel at Securely Loved. And recently I got onto TikTok. So
Okay.
I'm trying to learn the, how to connect with the younger generations and I'm finding my way through TikTok. So again, that is Securely Loved.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bevan. I will link all of those in the show notes for our listeners to be able to find there as well. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Dang, Gina, I could have picked Bev's brain for hours on this topic. So much of what she unpacked really landed for me as a fearful avoidant. The longer I've been on my attachment healing journey, as I've reflected back to some of the choices I've made, I must confess, I'm resonating more with the anxious side of my fearful avoidant attachment. I've noticed a theme of myself compromising my own values to try and gain the approval or attention of another person. But what's ultimately happened? My wounds around betrayal only got deeper, which made my ability to not only trust others, but more importantly, myself and my own discernment get worse and worse. I think one damaging thing in particular about hookup culture is we're made to believe that freely giving away the most sacred part of ourselves is no big deal at all, and that giving access to our bodies to just any Joe Blow results in zero negative consequences. Sleep with whoever, whenever, just do what feels good to you in the moment. Yeah, it might feel good in the moment, but that's the problem with feelings. They aren't reliable. We make really impulsive, not great decisions all the time based on vibes and feelings. And unfortunately for our nervous systems, this type of lifestyle has lasting harmful impacts. It's careless, it's reckless, it's damaging, and it's not an opinion. So don't come at me if you don't like what I'm saying. Take your beef up with science. The good news, you have total agency to get off the hookup culture train and start doing the inner attachment healing work to be the best version of yourself. You have full autonomy to put boundaries in place in your dating life that focus on getting to know someone, like who they really are at their core, and them getting to know you without clouding your judgment by jumping into bed. Remember what Bev said. Secure people don't generally participate in random hookup behaviors. So, for those of us who want to heal our insecure attachments and have awesome, healthy relationships, we've got to bring that securely attached energy into our lives and steal a thing or two from our securely attached friends' playbooks. And breaking free from the lie of hookup culture we've been made to buy into is one of those plays. I have a feeling a lot of inner healing is on the other side of putting hookup culture to bed once and for all. All right, Confessions fam. I know that what we talked about today is totally countercultural, which is exactly why this subject in particular needs to be discussed. If you could please take a quick minute to share this episode, leave a rating and review, it's going to help this episode get in front of more people. Be sure to come back in a couple weeks. We have another awesome guest lined up for our summer guest series, so you won't want to miss it. Definitely hit that follow or subscribe button so you know anytime a new episode drops. In the meantime, happy attachment healing, and I'll see you back here next time on the Attachment Confessions. Love you guys. Bye.